Most games are a product of their time, but what if the times change and the games remain? What are they supposed to do about that, and how are they supposed to shake past controversies that they'd rather leave behind? In 1999, Counter-Strike was an unofficial mod made by 2 people. These days, it's one of the most played games of all time, and over the last 25 years, a lot of stuff has changed. It is now a $1 billion title, a thriving hub around which thousands of people make a living. And I suppose with that, Valve now has an obligation to do what's best for that community. Livelihoods are at stake. Indeed, it makes me wonder if the 2 in Counter-Strike 2's name isn't just there to signify changes to the graphics and gameplay, but also to help distance the series from the stuff that happened previously. So if someone points out that Counter-Strike used to have something that's now deemed controversial, they can be like, ah, that was Counter-Strike 1. This is Counter-Strike 2. Dust 2 used to have the Israeli Defense Forces fighting the terrorists in a Middle Eastern setting. Used to. It's now completely disconnected from that. First by moving the map from the Middle East to a Moroccan theme, and by swapping the terrorists for the more comically themed Leet crew, and now for Counter-Strike 2, they finally replaced the IDF with the SAS models. Intentional or not, these changes have helped distance part of the game from comparisons with the real world in ways that, right now, are probably for the best. I want to stress now that these changes, and the pressure to change, aren't necessarily bad things. Counter-Strike is just treading new ground by having existed for long enough to have the world change around it enough to actually require changing the game again for. So let's spell out the obvious. Money drives the scene and changes the way things are. For YouTubers such as myself, we're heavily influenced by YouTube's monetization policies, and we go to great lengths to avoid demonetization, which you can do by not saying fuck, because why the fuck would a YouTuber risk losing money simply by saying fuck when it could easily be avoided by simply not saying fuck? Likewise with Counter-Strike, it's an esport, driven by tournaments, that are driven by sponsors and adverts. And to keep these sponsors coming back means minimising the risk to their brands by keeping the content of the game as clean and as family friendly as possible. So this means avoiding associations with real world drama and controversies, and of course by not saying
fuck. Apologies for the swear words, let's keep it clean, it's a family show.
And livelihoods now depend on it remaining that way. So even if changes won't impact Valve directly, they may still choose to do them, simply to make things easier for third-party tournaments, and for the community surrounding the game. Because what they don't want are advertisers pulling out of Counter-Strike and going to other games that are deemed safer and more family-friendly instead. When streaming, the War Owl encountered somebody in a Counter-Strike match with an inappropriate profile picture.
Oh crap, I didn't see that! RIP! I ran out of time!
Unable to do anything about it, and live on stream, he decided to quit the match. And this happened several times. I did actually look for examples of where people have been banned for streaming matches where other people within the match have behaved inappropriately, and I actually couldn't find any. But so what? War Owl didn't deem that suitable to display on his stream and sacrificed his match for it. Good on him. Valve eventually rolled out a profile picture, player name, and text blocks in order to help people avoid this kind of scenario. That's not to say that Counter-Strike has only been toned down. There are some ways in which I feel the game has got more offensive since Global Offensive. The gore effects are now more visceral than ever before, as blood spatters across the ground and leaves deformed flesh where the player is hit. I'm actually surprised they've gone down this route, when previously they even featured a low violence mode, also known as French mode, to get around German rules about blood and violence in games. When Counter-Strike was first created, the game was all about realism. The makers obsessed over realistic details on the guns and used real, named factions such as the IRA. And it was the realistic elements of this game that helped gain traction by distancing itself from the unreal experiences found in Unreal Tournament and in Quake. These days, the game isn't so focused on realism, nor is its appeal so heavily tied to that aspect of it anymore. It now has rainbow-coloured guns, a cartoony art style, and fictional characters with humorous personalities. Is all this done in an attempt to appeal to a younger generation of gamers? A general trend with what's popular? Or simply necessary to keep Counter-Strike free from reputation-damaging drama and controversy? Or is it a bit of all these things? If these changes are done correctly, they can even serve to benefit the game. When Dust 2 got Leet crew models back, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody online who disliked that change. They were fun and zany and paved the way for all the other character models that eventually got rolled out. It might no longer make sense for Inferno to be defended by Lieutenant Rex Crikey and a bunch of scuba divers, nor for the attackers to be a team of Rambos led by Condom Man. But it's kind of fun, and makes it harder for people to point the finger at Counter-Strike for being tied to real-world events and tragedies in some way. The one change I did notice was with shoots recently when it was added back into Counter-Strike 2. The terrorist team, which used to all be Somali pirates, were now nowhere to be seen, and to me that character model was what made shoots, and indeed several of the arms race maps, in CSGO feel kind of unique. And I mean CSGO because before then players got to pick their own character models in game. Is Counter-Strike to blame for school shootings in America? No, but that didn't stop a student from getting expelled after making a map of his school. It was a good map too. To the horror of parents everywhere, I know for a fact that literally every mapper ever to exist has attempted a map of their own school at some point, because it's just a place you spend so much of your time that it's kind of cool to imagine mapping it out in your favourite game. It's just that most people don't finish school maps because they quickly discover how much work is required and how little it actually looks like your school. So maybe it's just as well we all abandon it, given the dire consequences for the one mapper who managed to pull it off. Props to him though, like I said, great map. But I don't think it's coincidence there are so few maps based around schools. It's simply more risk than it's worth. Killing children simply isn't cool outside of the Harry Potter universe. It's why I'm so impressed that Ready or Not had the balls to actually feature a school-based map, albeit one that's more of a university, which somehow makes it more acceptable or whatever.
Terrorists win.
I'm honestly surprised that in Counter-Strike 2 the game still mentions terrorists, because it makes the game such an easy target. Take a look at this document, sent from the EU Counter-Terrorism Coordinator, suggesting an overlap between terrorism and video games, mentioning Counter-Strike several times in it, in seemingly incriminating ways. I'm actually going to save this for another video where I go through all the stuff mentioned in this report, not just because it serves as rage bait for any Counter-Strike player to read, but because I really did find it interesting to look at what's being said in here, and then to head to the source to see what the sources say. I would summarise it as being a bunch of half-truths, where the important stuff is lost in translation. And where better to demonstrate this than here, where Counter-Strike is described as being a game where players go through missions as a terrorist. Yeah, it's an interesting read. But my point is, Counter-Strike doesn't do itself any favours by openly mentioning terrorists. It could so easily have been cops and robbers, or cowboys and Indians, or red versus blue. And while those things would draw controversy for other reasons, it would still probably be safer than for the game to openly mention terrorists. Although, I just noticed the reference to terrorists has got less and less obvious over time. If I start with super old pre-panorama footage, it says terrorists in large writing. Post-panorama, slightly smaller writing, probably just coincidence. But now in CS2,
Terrorists win.
no terrorist at all, only spoken.
Terrorists win.
I reckon this was a deliberate change by Valve for Counter-Strike 2, and maybe the day will come when even the spoken reference is done away with, perhaps replacing it with some musical chime or whatever instead. Should Counter-Strike comply with what China wants? Because we are, whether we like it or not. Perfect World is its own version of the game, with various adjustments to the maps, like the removal of various logos and symbols. Monastery isn't featured at all, perhaps because it's based in Tibet. For the most part, these changes do not affect us in any way, but there's one that does. Since China demands skins without stuff like skulls, if a skin maker has a skull design and the design is accepted, then they have to go to the effort of creating another one just for Perfect World, simply to appease China. But will they bother with that? Or is it easier just to make skin designs without skulls on in the first place? One of the skin makers I talked to even said they preferred the non-skull design they made. But the fact of the matter is, they're still having their designs shaped and influenced by what China wants. I covered a map the other year, Die Wojna, which contained a hidden room showing pictures and information about Russia invading Ukraine. Valve blocked access to this map in Russia, though I don't know if they removed it because they were asked to, or if they preemptively removed it to avoid trouble. Gambling. If you need proof choices are driven by money, look no further than the case unboxing scene. Short story, France didn't like loot crates, so Valve changed the way they worked in France to get around this. They could have just removed loot crates, but they didn't because money. Longer story, France never deemed loot crates to be proper gambling, but they stated concerns about them in 2018 and intended to investigate them further. But before this was done, and loot crates potentially and properly banned, Valve rolled out the X-ray feature in 2019. This changed case unboxing so that instead of spending money to see what's inside a case you're unboxing, you can see what's inside that case before you spend money on it. But then you have to spend money opening that case before you can see what's inside the next one, and so on. So in other words, gambling but with extra steps. This X-ray feature doesn't follow the spirit of the law, but you can see why Valve did it because there's a lot of money to be made from loot boxes and they really wanted to just get on with that without drawing unnecessary attention from regulators. So there's a bit more to this story than first meets the eye, a few more shades of grey, but I disagree with Valve here, even though I totally understand why they did what they did. In fact, I disagree with them because I know why they did what they did. Steel was made an example of for match fixing. Back in 2015 when he led the team I Buy Power. What they did was to bet money on them losing the match and then they proceeded to lose the match. And Valve came down on them hard, banning Steel for life. Though this was eventually dropped to 10 years, meaning that the ban expires next January. And he tweeted that, against all odds, he has never given up. he is ready to be defined by something new and more positive. And with CS2, I wonder if Counter-Strike is hoping for the same thing, to put an entire number between it and any previous dramas and controversies it may have been embroiled in. Most games come and go and are a product of their time, but as a game that has spanned many different times, I think it's only fair that a game like Counter-Strike gets to reset itself once in a while. It is, after all, now older than most of the pro players who compete in it. The thing is, no matter how hard Valve tries, Counter-Strike will always be involved in drama. It's just too easy a target for people wanting something to blame or to distract from the bigger issues. Valve can mitigate potential problems in advance, they can deal with it correctly after, but there's still that little bit in between that will always remain a problem, and they're just going to have to hope it doesn't escalate too far at that stage. So please, Valve, sort out the cheater issue that people think the game has.